we'll do is connect to our own Wi-Fi then as well. We'll take a MiFi. So.
Okay.
But we are streaming now.
Okay.
Ah, there.
Starting to fill in.
A whole little crowd, isn't there? Just like being at a
It's
pub.
the weather.
So, Cynthia, do you think we should get started?
Yeah, I think we could go ahead.
Okay, good. All right. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. So, as you know, this is a 2-hour session, right? And we'll run through the format of it. But I just want to introduce the consulting team from our side that'll be supporting the conversation today. So, myself, David Bureau with Future IQ. Heather, do you want to give us a wave? Okay. So Heather will be, and she may send you a note on chat or something like that. We're trying to get a sort of a virtual registration of everybody who's participating. So if she may just want to confirm your details if your name's not on the screen. And we have John Stover and Leslie Deacon. So John, give us a wave. Leslie, right? Thank you. From JSA. And so we're collaborating together to work on this comprehensive planning process. So this is our 3rd task force meeting this week. And I'm going to share my screen, right? So, and then that'll be the background for the rest of it. And I assume you all know how to use Zoom and all the various functions, right? So I'm just going to share this to get us started. So can everybody see my screen now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Brilliant. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to walk us through the process here. Okay. Now, what we're going to do some rapid polling tonight. I know a number of you did the polling previously, so you should have this app downloaded. If you haven't done it, if you could download the Poll Everywhere app, you can get it on Google Play or the Apple Store. And then you set up you register at the bottom, it says register, you can set up an account for yourself. We're actually going to do 3 rounds of rapid polling, and there's more questions tonight than we've had in either of the previous task force sessions before. So it's going to be a bit of fun, actually, to collect a fair bit of data here that will give us the basis for some good discussion, hopefully. And I'll come back to these details if you have any trouble while we're doing it. So a couple of housekeeping deals, right? So if you're attending by Zoom, as I said, send Heather a chat message with your name and email so she knows you're attending, or actually she'll probably just pick you out if she can't work out who you are. The Poll Everywhere app, as I said, we're also we're not doing the in-person version, but we are recording this, and this is being streamed live on Facebook. So if you could mute your audio, please, when you're not talking, right? So if you all know how to mute that, please mute your audio until we get to the discussion part. Okay, the format for tonight, a couple of key steps, right? So we're going to go through an introduction, and we're just going to take 10 minutes to recap on what we've been doing through the visioning, strategic planning, and so far. We then want to talk about some of the community input and explore key topics with you, right? And do rapid polling and discuss around key issues and questions. And we're going to be fairly high level tonight. You know, I know when we start to talk about recreation and trails and those type of things, we get down and we want to draw lines on maps and things like that. We probably won't get quite that close to the ground tonight, because what we're really trying to understand is a lot more about the sort of scale and the appetite and how far you want to push this, and what are the drivers behind it, and what makes it important. So, because that's the information we need for the comprehensive planning process at the first level anyway. And then we'll have some questions and answers and talk about next steps at the end. Just so to recap, what's a comprehensive plan, if you haven't been through this? So essentially it's a vision and a roadmap for the future of Smithville. I was talking to Cynthia just at the start of this, this city is at a really interesting point of a transition where you're kind of growing up, right? And you really need to get your arms around your own destiny. And that's certainly something that came out of the visioning. And so the comprehensive plan should provide the framework that can help you collectively guide decision-making to head your community towards the future you want looking at over the next 10 years. And so I think it has different implications this time around rather than 2005 when it was last done. Because I think there's been a lot of change, but also it's now really trying to shape the future character and the future sort of layout and the geography of the community. In terms of an overview of the planning process, we started this in January. We had the launch in January, and we obviously got derailed like everybody else with the pandemic. So we flipped things around a little bit, and we've been doing background technical work. We've ran the community survey on the comprehensive plan. And now, of course, we've got the task force sessions that are this week and another round, of course, at the end of August, early September, and then some community discussion topics in between, and so on, with the aim of having a draft comprehensive plan ready for people to weigh into in September. And in terms of I guess the methodology of building this, right? So, because we wanted to really make sure that we were making a really clear connection from the visioning all the way through to the detail of the comprehensive plan, and that people could follow that and have input as on the way through. So it starts off with the community visioning, which was done last year. That really identified a lot of really important community aspirations, and we're going to just touch on those. We'll review the ones relevant for tonight. Then what we've been working on is thinking about what are the planning implications. So if you have an aspiration, that has implications in terms of planning. So it's this translation process of going from thinking about a particular aspiration the community might have to saying, well, what does that mean in terms of land use and all those sort of topics, right? Then we've been working on what we call these character areas. And these were discussed, or there was a set of character areas in the previous comprehensive plan, but we've rejigged those. And it's kind of an exciting way to think about geographic representation of a community in terms of a comp plan. And we'll sort of do a quick overview of those. Then, of course, there's overlay topics, and really a lot of what we're talking about tonight, which is recreation across the whole city, is an overlay topic that's part of the whole story. That's important, and then that informs the land use map, and then that informs the comprehensive plan. So that's the set of layers. So we're kind of in this sort of phase in here at the moment. There's a couple of things I just want to touch on, because we really were committed that this planning process and the result is unique and specific to Smithville, right? Because you have a unique set of challenges. It's a very interesting community. So some of the areas of innovation, I think, has been building off the pillars, which was a strong narrative that came through the visioning process. Engaging the youth throughout the visioning and planning. That's, that particularly in the visioning, there was just a fantastic youth participation. We're also trying to make this whole story really visual, right? I don't know, many of you probably read plenty of comp plans or some comp plans, and some of them can just be like doorstops, like they're just full of technical bits and pieces, and there's really not much, there's no beating heart in them, right? So what we're trying to do is to really create a very visual communication so that people can really get the sense and a feel for the future. And I think that's so important here, because one of the big issues in Smithville is people's concern about the sense of the small town feel, the character, that's a really important element to people. And so being able to visualize that becomes, I think, a really good tool. And then, of course, it's a community that is high performing in a number of ways, high performing school district, and is a community that has aspiration to be high performing. So we want to be leveraging best practices, and not just best practices at city planning, but really scanning, what are the really good things that people are doing that are thinking about how do you design livable communities going forward, and so on. The building block obviously comes from the scenario planning that was at the start of the visioning. We've all seen that, right? And we talked about the notion of expected futures and preferred futures. This is the expected future on the left side, preferred future responses on the right. Clearly different places, and the comp plan really is the mechanism to help the community make the pivot to change the direction to really target that preferred future that was identified so clearly. And it has the characters of, around that community oasis and the sort of the modernized and expanded worldview type community that was identified. All right, so then that comes to the strategic pillars. So right in the middle here, we have Smithville, a modern community oasis designed for 2030. Some really important language in that, right? So what people really identified was this idea of wanting to be a modern community, right? And forward-looking, but also had the experience of a protected oasis, because it's such a family-centric community, and people love it, that there's really the sense of a sort of a special oasis. The supporting pillars that were identified to execute on that were the continued commitment to education. Clearly, that's a major part of your value proposition. Enhanced recreation and connectivity, topic for tonight. Diverse housing and neighbourhood options, strengthen business and economic development, and the retention of the small town feel, which is what we'll be talking about tomorrow night. This is sort of just a schematic to show, across the top we have the pillars, we have the community aspirations that were identified out of the visioning in the blue boxes, and then below that, a set of planning implications and needs, and we'll talk about the ones specific for tonight. I did want to touch on this character area, and Leslie, you may want to jump in, or John, you may want to jump in and add to this. Just I want to introduce the concept here, right? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on specific character areas tonight, but this is something I think to get yourselves familiar with, because when you think about recreation and connectivity, that is an overlay for the whole city, which we're going to talk about. But it has different types of expression and implications in these different character areas. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see there's these 5 big character areas. They are run together, so they're slightly different and expanded from what was identified in 2005, although the underlying logic of them remains quite similar, right? And they're a way to think about the character or the guiding development for a certain area. So we have these 5 distinct character areas. We have what we call the North Residential, the Downtown Community Oasis, and we will talk about that a little tonight. The Hospital Bluff character area, which is where the hospital, the library, the school, all those things are. The 169 Industrial character area, and the 169 South character area. So Leslie or John, did you want to just add anything in terms of narrative on character areas?
No, I think that was a great overview. Again, this is something that was in the 2005 comp plan, is using these character areas as a tool. So we're going to be pulling through that planning concept of character areas as a tool to help inform decision making and understand the different types of places throughout the city.
Good. Okay. And the balance outside of that, so the city areas that are outside of those character areas are essentially agricultural land or green space or conservation areas or habitat. So, okay. So let's talk about enhanced recreation and connectivity, right? That's the topic for tonight, right? So to give you the background on it, so the community aspirations, so where we ended up in the visioning and strategic planning process, the sort of 4 big priorities were the creation of the recreation and connectivity master plan. Matt's working on that, or will be. Study community desires for recreation facilities. So this is going to be a kind of interesting part of the discussion tonight. There's this sort of ongoing discussion about the desire to have, like a rec centre or a community centre and so on. And, you know, there's sort of a little bit of a case here when we looked at it in the visioning of having an aspiration for something that's really quite fantastic, but financially it's probably out of the reach of the community at this stage. You know, typically some of the things people were talking about really show up in communities that are 20,000 population. So we want to try and just get a little bit of a dial in on the sort of a reality check with that tonight. We want to talk about building recreation as an economic driver, or tourism as an economic driver, and the regional trail connectivity. So they were aspirations that came out of the visioning. Planning implications, when you think of it as that, is this development of a recreation connectivity master plan that establishes key priorities by connecting all the trails and main nodes together. And it's, you know, it's probably a 10 or a 15-year adventure, but certainly this idea of connecting together the pieces that are already there has been very strong in the community input so far. This idea of a future trail system that creates a clear separation of cars and cyclists and pedestrians, especially on the eastern side of Smithville. We want to probe that a little bit because, you know, actually the sort of view I've formed, right, is that you have an opportunity to do something really quite remarkable here that is different to other communities, which we'll talk about. But there's also then the potential to link to the broader regional trails, and then really sort of driving new developments to build into this multimodal transportation and trail connections. So they're the sort of starting planning implications. But really from the get-go, recreation was identified by the community as a really positive opportunity. So this is, we were asking people about a whole range of topics, and you can see recreation here on this scale here. This is about the nature of change. This end here being very, very well prepared, very positive. So people are saying it's got a huge positive impact on the community, but the community probably a little bit more work to do there. But the discussion topic for tonight, right? Trails and connectivity, Smithville Lake and the recreation amenity development. We want to talk about that particularly, and tourism as an economic driver. Right, so let's dive in, right? So how I want to do this is I want to do a little bit of context, just a few slides to sort of set the stage of sort of trends, feedback we've had from the community surveys. Then we're going to do a rapid polling exercise, and we're going to have some discussion about it. So let's talk about what people have been saying about trail networks and recreation. So this whole idea of expanding and connecting the trails to create a citywide trail network to offer a multimodal experience as a community. So that came out very strongly as a desire in the visioning process and has been repeated in subsequent surveys. People also recognise that it helps make the city very attractive to recreation-oriented young professionals, families and seniors. A lot of data on active retirees and being, you know, seeking walkable communities and so on. And recreation trails connecting people to nature and open spaces, which Smithville has a lot of, and helping to leverage the lake. But there's also this safety issue too, which is this desire to have a really good network of sidewalks and trails that allow students to get to and from schools and community areas safely, obviously. Some of the commentary from the community surveys, you can see that there. You know, a trail to downtown, from downtown to the lake is an excellent idea. Sidewalks for neighbourhoods and streets where they don't exist. You know, it's connected all together. But people are basically saying they want trails because of walkability, recreation, connectivity, and safety, amongst other reasons. Just as a little bit of a sort of an outside-in perspective, just as a sort of a future tourism perspective and recreation, some of the work we've done at Future IQ, we've looked at particularly recreation-based tourism trends, and almost all outdoor recreation activities are showing increases year on year. And the few that aren't are things like hunting, and you know, that's the sort of, they're the ones that aren't showing year on year increases, but almost every other recreation activity is. And at the same time, there's this movement which is really starting to flourish in the US, but is, you know, and also flourishing in Europe and other places, is these huge greenways or trails or levels of connectivity. And I just pulled this one here, which is the Great American Rail Trail, which is this idea of connecting literally the West Coast and the East Coast on basically as close as possible to abandoned railway lines, right? And so the green stuff's already done, the red and the others are being infilled. So, and you're not actually far off that, right? And so, you can kind of drill in further to these sort of trail networks around the US and even the Midwest. And there's this sort of increasing desire for people to jump onto these much bigger connected trail systems. And the part of a question for you is how important is it for you to plug into that? We'll probe that tonight. We're also sort of wanting to probe this sort of multimodal network, this complete street concept. And Leslie will touch on that a little later, this idea of, thinking about these separated but integrated sort of multimodal transit corridors where we have vehicular road networks, bicycle and multimodal, pedestrian paths and sidewalks, but all designed to coexist. And so on. And here's what I think is the really interesting geographic quirk that you have that makes the possibility of doing something really extraordinary quite intriguing, right? So on the left-hand side here, there's this schematic of Smithville. And actually this is a map it's a heat map that looks at people who work where they live. So this is sort of density of population of people who drive off to work or somewhere. And you can see that, but we know this, that most people live on the eastern side of 169 in Smithville. And it's such a skinny north-south sort of arrangement. The diagram on the right-hand side is the trail, existing and proposed trail. So the dotted lines that you might be able to see branching off are proposed regional trails. And then, of course, there's the downtown to the Lake Trail and then the Smithville Lake Trail. And what the intriguing possibility is here is to be able to build a parallel trail network from top to bottom of Smithville on the eastern side of 169. So the possibility that, if you're a kid or an active senior or anybody, you can get around and get to all the important amenities in the community without having to cross a significant road in any harmful manner or be on a road, sharing a road with traffic. And it gives you the possibility, I think, of creating one of those communities that could be really quite an interesting phenomenon. But whether there's interest in that, that's what we want to probe tonight. And then I did say we'd just touch on sort of trails. This is a schematic of what's the sort of north residential character area. And, we were talking about there's these sort of trails proposed that, being built in as part of development processes and being planned. So each character area could have its own sort of on and off ramps to what might be a sort of a backbone trail system down this eastern corridor of Smithville. So we want to dig into this concept of this recreation trail network, and we want to do some live polling, right? So what I'm going to ask you to do is pull out your smartphones, right? And you should have registered if you haven't. So on the left-hand side here, you can see at the bottom, if you hit register, it'll come up. It gives you an option to log in or sign up. If you've signed in before, you can just log in. But sign up is just simply your email or password, your name. And then the poll name here, where if you hit the home button at the bottom, that says pollev.com, and the username is FIQ124. So if you can just jump in on that, and once I start the presentation, what's going to pop up is going to be the questions I'm going to show on the screen. They're going to be mirrored on your phone, and you're just going to select A, B, C, D, or E, or whatever the configuration is. Is there anybody having any troubles getting on to the poll? Okay, I'm assuming that means people are on, right? So let's have a go at some polling here, right? So this is a test question, just a practice run, right? So do you live in Smithville? And you can play with it. You can see at the bottom, you can go back and change your response if you want to, right? If you sort of think about this, because I'm going to give about 30 seconds per question. So you can just change it and play around with that. All right. So we can stop playing. I'm actually going to do proper questions now. All right, you ready for the first one? Here we go, right? So how much of the current and potential trail networks, or how much are the current and potential trail networks part of the future value proposition of Smithville as an attractive community? So the question is, okay, got this current and potential network, how much do you think that's going to be a key part to your value proposition? And I think D and E are mistakes on this one. I apologise for that, right? You only have 3 choices here. Very key part of our community, our future story, and a key differentiator. Not likely to be different to other communities, or does not factor as part of our value to residents. Okay, so I'm assuming that that's probably universal, that we see this trial story to be a really key part of the value proposition. Okay, so let's dig into this a little bit further. So Smithville has the potential to create a unique trial and connectivity network, and has new resources which can be leveraged, right? So you've got resources you didn't have before that can be leveraged for bigger grants and bigger stories. How bold do you think we should be thinking? So very bold, think big and out of the box, create something unique, create a workable integrated network of trials in a realistic timeframe of 10 to 15 years, or C, build out the basic trials as and when development occurs, or D, what we have is good enough. Okay, just give you a minute to finish your polling on that. So maybe I'll just stop for a question here. And so somebody who said you want to be very bold, think out of the box, create something unique. What's your motivation in that, and what's in your mind as you respond that way? Somebody who want to just share your perspective.
Hi, this is Jim. I personally feel, David, like on that question, I do want us to be very unique. I think we have a lot of opportunities in Smithville with the lake and with the different connectivity. So as far as thinking outside the box more than a giant plan is kind of what I was thinking.
Okay. All right. So what does a giant plan mean to you, Jim?
Well, I mean, I don't want it to be so ambitious that it's not something we can't do. I guess that's what I mean.
Gotcha. Okay, got it. All right. Okay. All right, good. All right. Okay, good. So let's go to the next question. So what do you see as being the primary purpose of the trials network for the community? Is it recreation, connectivity, safety, or is it a transport alternative?
David, can you elaborate on what you think the difference between recreation and connectivity should mean or means?
So recreation for me in framing this, Jack, is it's somewhere I jump on to go and walk or ride or exercise, right? Connectivity would be a way I can get from A to B in a nice manner. Okay. That's interesting. All right, because it's interesting the safety thing didn't come up, right? Because that certainly was in some of the community surveys, and I think why some of these questions are here is contextually. This helps us think about what we're really trying to create inside in thinking about a trial network. All right, so So, what key community node would you most want trial connections to that you don't currently have? Right, so the lake and recreation areas, downtown area, schools and library, shopping and dining areas. What key community node would you want trial connection to that you don't have? Okay, all right, looks like most votes are in. Okay, interesting, there's none on shopping and dining. All right, okay, thank you. What type of trial development would you ideally want? So, and this is sort of a bit the design aspect. So a complete separation of trials from the road network. So something like, if you see the models in, Amsterdam or the Netherlands and places like that, where literally it's a parallel universe. The complete streets approach, which is where, there's sort of an integrated but separation between, pedestrians and and bikeways and roads, but they're in a complete sort of package, and sidewalks are enough. Okay, all right. Let's go to the next one. Would a trail network encourage you to walk or bike versus use a car? Okay. Okay, interesting. How often would you use a trail system if you had easy connection? Would it be daily, several times a week, weekly, occasionally, rarely, never? Okay. All right. Fascinating. All right, good. Oh, still some, just give you a second more to. Okay. So obviously several times a week and daily are the 80% responses. What way would you mostly use the trail system? To walk or bike, walk or run, bike, scooter or other, it could be skateboard or any of those, you know, e-scooters or something, or never use? Okay. Thank you. So this is then starting to think about the bigger picture priorities. So which is most important to focus on first? Is it to build the internal connections within the Smithville trail system, or build the key connections into the broader regional trail system? Okay. All right, looks like we're all in. Okay, it's a pretty clear priority. So this is all with the caveat, knowing that it takes money, resources and factors outside our control. How soon would you like to see the internal Smithville trail system built out and connect all internal nodes, at least at an initial level, right? So we have the basic connectivity. It may not be the perfect, 8-foot trail, but we have the trail system at least tied together. And taking the caveat of money, resources and factors as soon as possible, which is the next couple of years, if we call it that, over the next 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or 10 to 15 years. Okay. All right. And we might come back and talk about, when we get to the end of the polling too, about the sort of the two sort of big responses there about, the shorter, more urgent next couple of years versus the 5 to 10. And then this is the last one on this pack. So knowing again, it takes money, resources and factors outside our control. How soon would you like to see Smithville Trail Network connect into the regional system? So as soon as possible, next couple of years, over the next 3 to 5, next 5 to 10, or the next 10 to 15. Okay. Interesting. Okay. All right, good. So let's have some discussion, right? So John or Leslie, if you're looking at the discussion board, the chat board, I can't see. I don't know if there's any questions that have been posed there, or Heather, anything that Sean sent in that's relevant to this? And so generally then, so here's the question, what are the results that you just saw? What do they tell you about thinking about the trails, recreation sort of connectivity piece for the comp plan? What does that reveal to you in terms of that rapid polling? What are those results that you just, what's your take home out of that?
I think that there's some urgency to it. This is Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
I think it looks like people are anxious to have this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and if you tie that to the value proposition as well, how strong the response to that was, you know, I think that there's this kind of moment in time almost, right, where there's this, like Jim was saying, you know, there's a sort of there's a sense of something happening in Smithville, and if you can kind of, you know, lock up the pieces, the access ways, and all those sort of things you need to do, and tie things together, I think you literally could transform the type of community that you are. Because if you look at the different scenarios, the one that people, you know, said that was the expected, where we might end up if we don't do anything different, that's really, you're living in a suburb driving to work somewhere, right? That's that sort of future played out, right? Whereas really the whole notion of the community oasis is something different, right? So it's sort of a transformational step for the community. And obviously, you know, there's community support for that. Other comments about what jumps out of it, and Leslie and John, feel free to jump in on this too, and probe it from a sort of a comprehensive planning perspective as well.
Sure, and we have some comments from Sean, which I can jump in with, but I start to heard someone posting a question first.
I was going to make just a quick comment to your question. Is also, I think, the timing with everything, and while we all hope COVID is a temporary state, I know just being a current trail user and getting out and recreating, I have seen more people out on those trails than I have ever seen, and I'm sure, Matt, you can probably attest to that as well. Just the people that have been out and about and trying to stay socially distant and be out and recreate. I think the timing is, frankly, it's one of those situations that the timing is perfect to look at enhancing this recreation and connectivity.
Okay.
Well, and this is Julie again. One of the things that I see, I think at the very least, we should be able to walk, bicycle, run, you know, from one end of Smithville to the other, somewhere along 169 or somewhere where there's a shoulder or a dedicated lane where you're not going to get hit or run over, or, I mean, it's just not walking and biking friendly anywhere in town except out by the lake or in the little neighborhoods. And I think we need to fix that.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, that's been reflected in, you know, the great American planning mistake, in my observation, right, is the lack of pedestrian access, right? I mean, so many places, like you say, you can't even walk along roads, right? And yet we're suddenly in an era now where cities are competing over, you know, who's the most bike friendly and who's got the most regional trails, and you know, you've got seniors who are looking for walkable neighborhoods. You know, there's this sort of societal shift that's occurred, right? And a lot of planning and infrastructure is been left in the old world, right? But you seem to have this opportunity, right, to be able to, because you've got, you know, that whole eastern sort of corridor, and I know, Jack, you've talked a lot about all those pieces and how you plug them together, right? But it seems to be within reach. So, yeah, John.
Well, yeah, and I would say to you know, us as consultants and outsiders, I think that Smithville is in a somewhat unique place where you have towns that either are really rural and there's not going to be that much growth, and so there's only so much opportunity in terms of increased density and an investment from a planning perspective. And then you have other towns that are kind of fully built out, and so it's kind of too late to do something really innovative. You don't have that kind of green space or this ability to create something truly new to the extent that you might otherwise. Smithville is in some regards, at least to my mind, kind of in that sweet spot of, you have the initial infrastructure and trail network. You have these great assets and things to clearly connect. Two, you have the will of the community, but you also are a growing town with a lot of greenfield, a lot of kind of infill development that will be coming. So there's really the opportunity to have a lot of preservation of green space, while still, as new subdivisions come along, kind of through that process, whether through mandates or incentives or whatever the mechanism is, make sure that the trail network kind of grows along as density or population growth happens too. And so I think that there's really an exciting opportunity here that you don't see in a lot of places.
Yeah, and John, that's a really good comment. If I could throw that back to, because I know we're preaching to the choir here, right? Is that, you know, people have joined a task force on recreation and connectivity because we're interested in it, right? And probably much more than us, you're closer to what the sort of mood is. And I was sort of intrigued by Jim's comment about, you know, seeing more people out on the trails than you've ever seen before. Do you think the sentiments you're expressing here are sort of broadly supported in the community, or is this sort of a sort of recreation fan club that, you know? Because what we are trying to do is we're trying to. Now, I would actually say I think what we're talking about is very reflective because we've seen that in the data, right? But we are trying to validate and ground truth some of these ideas in this task force process in the comprehensive planning, because we don't want to get to a point down the track where we're, you know, way too far out ahead of the community in terms of these sort of bold ideas or ambitious ideas, at least in terms of some of these elements. So what's your thought about how reflective of what you're saying is reflects the community or what you're hearing from other people?
Well, David, we do have the fan club here for sure, but the voters in the last 2 times we put stuff on the ballot, we've had 3 initiatives related to walkability, trails, so a bond issue and 2 sales taxes. You know, in the ballot language for the bond and the sales tax, the first time was all around making downtown more walkable, adding shared bike lanes. And even when 169 went in years ago, they put a bike lane all the way from 92 to downtown. So, which, Jack, that was what, 20 years ago or more. And then we did the Parks and Rec sales tax and the infrastructure. So we've had 3 different ballot initiatives that have all passed that have all had trails and recreation as their focus, so, and walkability.
And what sort of support? I know they passed, right? But were they slam dunk pass, or were they?
Parks and Rec sales tax was a little closer than the other, but that was, you know, in June, post, you know, in the COVID world. The other one, the bond had to pass by a pretty high. It wasn't a simple majority, right, Jack? It was 5/7 or
yeah, 4/7. It had to pass by that, and the bond passed. Obviously, 57% is what it had to have, and I think it had 60 something.
Yeah, so about it, the bond had more votes than I did, so I'll put it that way.
Okay.
David, I did want to comment. This is Cheryl. That even though you are sort of preaching to the choir in one way, this is just a very small part of the choir that loves the trails, and especially during this COVID. And I think it will grow because more and more people have learned about the trails. There have been not just the bikers, not just the exercisers, not just the runners, but families walking these trails and enjoying the outdoor and enjoying the space. So I think it's going to just be a very important part of our future to take advantage of what we even have at the lake trails and build on that. And I think it's important, and I think it'll bring a lot of not only recreation but economics to our community.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah, and David, one of the stats that we don't really talk about a lot, prior to the 180th Street Trail being built, that was built with those bond funds, we did not have a single city-owned trail in city limits. Wow. That's been built in the last 2 years, right, Jack? Is that an accurate statement? Like Harbor Lakes was private, everything else was in the county, right?
Interesting.
Jack's nodding his head.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, everything else, David, was not. I mean, we did have a period where there was not a single trail in city limits that was city maintained, and why the county had 30 miles of trails.
Okay.
Or whatever their number is now.
Hey, this is Randy Graham. I love this discussion. One thing I would just throw on about to Jim's original comment about seeing all the people on the trails. I've just lived in Smith. My family and I've just lived here for 2 years now. But one thing I've really noticed about the trail use is it spans all age ranges, which is real. It's broadly supported. My high school daughter loves to go out with her friends and hit the trails. My daughter, when she comes back from college, goes out and hits the trails for walking and biking. And that's one thing I've really noticed is there's broad support across a lot of age groups, at least in my neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's, you know, what you're describing is is what strikes me as that really unique value proposition. I mean, there's not many, there's not many communities that I've worked with, at least, and John and Leslie can talk to it as well, that have that capacity to be on a trail, maybe, I don't know, Boise, Idaho or something like that, but you're either on one side of the river or you're on the other, right? But they, they have the similar geographic advantage, right, of a corridor that, and it really, I think, can be quite transformative for the community. So any comments, John or Leslie, you want to jump in on anything before we go to the next section?
Maybe Heather.
Yeah. Actually, Sean did have a question about bike lanes, and he related it a little bit to the safety issue. He said, how extensive are we talking for bike thoroughways, especially in the northern character area? I was hit by a truck who drove off in March while running on F highway due to no pedestrian protected areas. That was his
and that's unfortunate. I saw that happen when that happened to Sean. And unfortunately, F highway was a highway for a long time, right? Now it's a city street.
Okay.
So now we have the capacity, we have that street legally. So now if we do want to, as we start building stuff out, we can do that. But yeah, it was built as a highway without a shoulder.
Okay.
So.
This is Janelle Smith, and I'm just curious. We moved here 14 and a half years ago from Long Island, New York. And when we walked in Long Island, we were walking along lots of traffic. Somebody mentioned at the beginning that they wanted to have where we could run and, put trails and stuff along 169. I don't have a desire to go where there's a lot of fumes from cars. I like going, on the F highways, if we can get those kinds of things and get it connected. We were told when we moved into Harbor Lake that the whole huge plan was that eventually Harbor Lake's trails were going to even connect into the Smithville Lake trails and the rest of the town. I would love to be able to have a bike ride where when our 21 grandchildren come to visit at different times, we can ride our bikes down F Highway and get into the downtown to, on our bikes, go to Nellie's for an ice cream cone, but there's no safe way to do that right now. But I would rather have that priority put towards getting into the town areas from the less traffic-y areas than 169.
Yeah, sorry, Damien.
I would say, Janelle, that's interesting you bring that up, because whenever that's one of the conversations I bring up a lot with the school district is that walkability to the schools. And
I think that's important. And the only reason I said along 169 is there are apartment buildings on there along 169. And I've seen people walking and trying to go up and down 169, and you take your life in your hands doing that. I think it's great if you live out in the neighborhoods like Harbor and Greyhawk and stuff that have trails and you can ride in on F. So I have no trouble riding into downtown from here because I can ride it. I mean, F isn't great, but
I wouldn't ride on F because to me, there isn't enough of a shoulder on F. I think
well, I've ridden on it. It's not safe, but I've ridden on F, and that's better than people trying to go up and down 169 who live on the fringes of the city, and want to be able to walk to downtown. There's not a good way to do it. I mean, it's both, really. I mean,
so the apartments are at Midtown. You still have another 5 miles north of the apartments. So when you say along 169 to people that live in Harbor Lakes like myself and Janelle, they start thinking of north of Dollar General. I agree. There needs to be connectivity to the areas that are apartments and things like that are developed along 169. But putting a trail all the way from downtown to W Highway makes no sense along 169.
No, I was talking about like from the Methodist Church on the north to, past 92 on the south, maybe over where that restaurant is and the veterinary and stuff. I mean, that's what I meant. I don't mean clear out to Greyhawk, because you can get into town on F. Just improve F for the neighborhoods out here. But there are people that use that 169 corridor.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you start talking about those types of areas where when those were developed, some of them were outside of city limits, and some of those, and I don't think that if you develop along a highway, you're required to put in a sidewalk. It's not really a MoDOT requirement or anything like that. So I don't even know that we would have right-of-ways to do that, but I agree it's an important area to start looking at.
All right.
Well,
so I think we've got
one other quick item that Sean asked of the community, which is kind of the other side of this of the token is about the funding, and he says in relation to a trail network proposal, is the city looking at grants for this funding? What's the distribution cost with potentially with the Army Corps of Engineers, and would the city potentially be looking at a tax levy to fund this project?
So interesting that was asked, because in June, which was about 6 weeks ago, we just passed a tax for our parks and stormwater. And 2 years prior to that, we passed a tax that was for infrastructure that's building the trail out to the lake, and a bond. And we also got a federal grant for that lake trail. So all those are in progress. So.
All right. Okay. So I think we've covered this, and I think that some real clear alignment here around the need to be, if not bold, certainly ambitious, right, and seize the moment, right. That there is a discernible opportunity, a window of opportunity here to do something that's really remarkable. And the way my mind works on this is I always keep thinking that what I keep hearing people talk about, it reminds me of that sort of, you see those anatomical drawings of a human body, and you have the arterial system and the vein system, the red and the blue, right? And they connect, right? And so having this system of, you can move by automobile, right, and or cars and get through on one system, but then you can go and do it by bike or pedestrian mode on the other system. And there's that sort of distinct separation, but it allows you to get from A to B in different ways. So, all right, good. So let's go to another topic, right? Because we want to talk about some other things here today as well. So Smithville Lake and recreation amenity development. So I want to just kind of front door a little bit here, and then we have another round of questions as well. So what people say about developing the lake, let's start that take that as a start, right? So, people talk about the lake becoming a tourism destination without question. Some people want to see limited development on the lake, retain some of the habitat. There's a fairly universal view, I think, that Smithville's losing some economic development dollars, tourism dollars, by not having that strong connection from the lake traffic and the downtown, although that's obviously improving and so on. And if you look at it in terms of, this is from the community survey that has been running as part of the comprehensive planning, we asked, given the restrictions about how it's developed and so on, right? What's your view about the lake as a tourism destination? And you can see, make the lake a tourism destination, the highest response. Develop the lake, do not develop the lake. And these were categorizations from people's written responses, right? Allow both tourism and natural areas, add restaurants to the lake and so on. But overall, there's a clear desire to see something happen with the lake. So what we want to do in a comprehensive planning process is we want to open the door for things that you want to have happen in the future. So future land use implications and changes and so on. So we want to probe this a little bit and talk about some ideas and suggestions. And Leslie or John, you may want to jump in on this as well. But one of the proposals that's in the draft process that we're trying to test and vet with people is around this downtown community oasis character area, and a proposed annexation of part of the Smithville Park. This idea of a phased annexation to be able to think about incorporating more of that lake control into the system, which allows for a number of things. Obviously it's recreation and trails and so on, but also to think about development and potential tourism opportunities and so on. John or Leslie, did you want to talk to that, add any commentary on that? I know this issue about selective annexations come up in other task force discussions as well.
Yeah, so there's we've heard on a number of kind of different capacities the idea of annexation, especially from the lens of Smithville controlling its own destiny, and that kind of being swallowed up and surrounded by either competing land uses that either supply jobs and commercial tax base that the city isn't capitalizing on, or supply recreational amenities that then the city doesn't get to benefit from fiscally, or provides certain types of housing that then competes. And one of those kind of key areas of annexation is closer to the lake, but that brings up its own, as David just talked about, and as you all know, complexities in that that land kind of immediately surrounding the lake is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, and there's no necessarily indication that that is acquirable. But there's certainly been, from our understanding, more and more talk that that may be something that the city should look to pursue. And so in some ways, there's almost kind of a twofold question. There's if the city's able to acquire at least some of this area or have some more access in terms of city ownership of property closer to the lake, how could that happen and should it? And then kind of the second element is, to what extent should the city leverage property near the lake for enhanced tourism? And it's really kind of the flip side, that there's the pros cons of if you have more, the kind of range of amenities could be anything from, a hotel overlooking the lake, a recreational access from boating to canoeing or kayaking. It could be a little boardwalk with shops, certain things that really kind of leverage the lake from a commercial vantage point, help generate more business activity and more dollars and draw more people into town. But at the same time, then the character of the lake starts to change, where it's not as kind of unadulterated, and now you have more commercial uses nearby. But again, that's all with a huge if of it's even possible to kind of build within that close of a proximity to the lake. So there's a lot of concepts there, and maybe that kind of provides some good discussion as well.
Good, and we're going to probe some of those too in the polling we're going to do. Arrange those topics exactly what you just talked about, John. So Leslie, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah. Just to jump in, to expand upon your comments and John's comments, I think too, from a planning perspective of getting that Main Street trail in, connecting the lake to the downtown, is really one of the things that's pushing this conversation further and further. So as more people are able to connect their recreational asset and the tourist asset of the lake with the downtown businesses and increasing customer base for those businesses, bringing dollars to those businesses to strengthen the downtown, as well as providing fiscal revenue for the city, like that's kind of where these ideas are starting to merge to, with this idea of connectivity and commercial activity at the lake, and the next 10 years, what that might mean.
Yeah, that's really good, Leslie. And we want to talk about this too, so that we can explore both the intended and unintended consequences, right? So, people say, oh, is it an economic bump if we can connect the visitation of the lake to the downtown, but what does that do in terms of congestion and so on? We want to explore that a little bit tonight as well. So some other topics we want to just add into this mix here is, in the community survey, 34% of people said that including a community centre to the city's recreational facilities is critically important, right? So that's, it's a big chunk of people who are saying that this idea of a community centre of some sort is critically important. Of course, those things all come with a price tag, right? So part of what we want to talk about tonight is sort of have a pretty honest conversation about, what's aspirational to what do we really need to what must we have, right? And trying to sort that out a little bit. And when we asked about recreational facilities, and I know this was a discussion that occurred also at the end of the visioning, was about this idea of, a big, sports complexes. But these are the sort of responses that people put in terms of facilities they see as critically important for Smithville. Things like outdoor pools, dog parks, indoor recreation options, indoor pools, winter activities, splash parks, and so on, right? Some of those are relatively cheap. Some of those actually have really big price tags on them, right? And some of them are really only viable in, when you get to cities of over 20,000 or even much larger cities. But there's this sort of sentiment that's been running through a lot of the community discussion, and there's been advocate groups for these ideas of some of these big community investments without perhaps fully understanding implications of price tags. But one of the things that did come up was about talking about potential community centre location, if there was the ability to be able to do something that had some sort of multi-use. Certainly this what's called the Hospital Bluff character area, which is this sort of where there's a lot of social infrastructure already, where the schools are, the library and so on. that this might be the sort of place that something like that would logically, end up to enhance some of the sort of assets that the community has. All right, so we want to do a little bit of polling on what we talked about, right? So, and particularly dig in on some of the things that John was talking about. So it should come up on your phone in a second, but you may have to log back in on your username because your phone may have disconnected from the poll, right? But if you do, it's just FIQ 124, and I'll just kick off with the first set of questions here, right? So the downtown character area proposes some phased annexation of the Smithville Fork Park. If this is possible, to the point, the big if, how do you view this idea? Essential for our future and being able to manage growth. Good idea, helps keep our options open, so it gives us a control factor. Maybe, but need to see the value. Not appropriate to do. Okay, I'll let you run with that for a second. All right. Okay, looks like most of the responses are in. Oh no, still got some, okay. Okay, so we have, what's that sort of, I guess around 83% of people seem to be supportive in a strong way of the idea, either essential or a good idea, and recognizing that it's about controlling your future. Let me just get to this. All right, next question. So, if there was to be development of the lake, so which type of development do you think is best suited for potential lake development, right? So you get one choice here, right? So A, large scale convention center, B, a boutique hotel and small event center, C, condo vacational housing units, D, basic seasonal accommodation, services such as restaurants, sporting stores, etc. Some combination of the above or none of the above, don't want anything. Okay. So there's no takers on none and there's no takers on accommodation. Okay, and it seems to me to be where that's landing is the boutique hotel, small event center predominantly, and the restaurant, sporting stores, or combinations, right? And that seems to be like providing like some really useful amenities for that locals and visitors could enjoy. Okay, let's go to the next one. What type of development do you think is highest immediate priority for potential lake development? So if you were able to do it, what would be the thing would be the highest immediate priority? What would you start with? Okay. Narrow that down to two choices. Okay, good. All right, still, all right, we'll go to the next one. What type of development would you be most opposed to? Okay, large scale development, boutique hotel, condo vacation housing, seasonal, oppose all of them, don't want new development. Interesting. Okay, good. All right, looks like that's stabilized, okay. Oh, and by the way, the results from all of this too will be, we'll output these results and these will be posted on the portal as part of the record of the discussion. So let's think about some recreational amenities. So what future level of additional lake recreation amenities do you think would be optimal? So A, high level amenities like more marinas and recreation complexes. B, more developed recreation like recreation parks, boardwalks, so sort of lower impact, but some level of development. Or C, low impact trails and viewing areas. Or D, none at all. Okay. All right, looks like we're all in. And now, in this one here, you get to type some answers, right? So we talked about unintended consequences, right? And there's been this notion of over-tourism, which is where places get loved to death, right? And people are talking about developing the lake. And what we want to try and do is make sure that we don't inadvertently create something we don't like. So you can type your responses just straight in as words, right? So it creates a word cloud. So what would equate to over-tourism on the lake from your perspective? So you can just type things in. Is anybody typing anything in? Is it not coming up? Oh, Lita, you're right, okay. Dingy, I like that word. So somebody's gonna have to tell me what Branson is.
It is a
Go do a
lake
strategic
community
plan
on
for
the
him,
south
David.
of Missouri.
Okay, right. Oh, okay. Okay, that Branson, right?
I'm sure they'll have an
Okay.
RFP out.
Yeah, so there's this issue of you can start seeing coming up now, the overcrowded, and then all the consequences that come with that. And that's part of what I think, you know, in thinking about the comprehensive plan and thinking about a 10-year trajectory is that, you know, there are any number of communities that 10 years ago were, you know, working hard to build their tourism economy. And up until the pandemic, very recently, were regretting it, right? Because they were dealing with a lot of unintended consequences and sort of being overwhelmed as essentially a small community with, you know, becoming a real destination of sorts. So I think part of what we're trying to think about is trying to understand what looks like over tourism to you. So that's what starts to get factored into the comprehensive plan, allows you to avoid over tourism. Okay, let me go to the next question, right? So many areas have been experiencing over tourism, as we talked about. Based on current growth and use, how close do you think Smithville Lake area is to being overused? So already there, 2022, 2025, 2030, never will happen. Interesting. All right, so you're not seeing this as a impending issue. I'm interested in the views about that it never will happen. Does anyone want to speak to that as to why you put 2030 or never will happen? What do you see as the natural kind of buffering you've got that you're not going to face the issue of over tourism? Anybody want to offer a comment?
It's this comprehensive plan, Dave.
Sorry?
I
Good
think
answer,
it's
Jack.
plan.
I love the fact that the Corps of Engineers owns most of the property around the lake. I love the fact that it doesn't surrounded by homes and docks, that it's very private and natural. And I hope it stays that way. We were out kayaking this morning from 7 to 8 a.m. before it started to rain. It was so beautiful. I just want the connection of the lake to the city. I think that's the way we need to take advantage of it. So I never want that to happen.
Yeah, I know you never wanted to happen, but there's plenty of communities that I can take you to that never wanted it to happen, but it happened. So other comments? Did I hear Matt? Was Matt trying to jump in, or the mayor?
Yeah, I guess I would just echo what the Smiths said in that because the lake is owned by the Corps of Engineers and they have fairly strict standards for building on the lake, something like an event center, you know, you could maybe get done, but there's so much bureaucratic paperwork to get through. It's going to be, that will even be a tough haul. Because of that fact, it's going to be hard for the lake to develop at any time in the foreseeable future, especially within the next 10 years.
All right, good. All right, good. Okay, let's go to the next one. One sec. All right. So, given price tag and community size, how important do you really think additional high-cost recreation amenities such as pools, indoor recreation are? Now, I know if we ask the question, would you want that? People go, yep, for sure, right? But this is sort of that, what do we really, really need versus what do we would like, but it's not within our reach yet, right? So A, critical, we have to have these. B, would be great, but not urgent. C, we will really need them within 5 years, or we won't need them within 10 years. Okay, bit of a scatter response then. All right, we'll go to the next one. There's been discussion about a multi-purpose community centre. Where do you think such a facility would be best located? So incorporated into the downtown area, somewhere near the lake, or the Hospital Bluff Carrick area, which was the one I pointed to earlier, that is where the school and the library and so on are. Okay. Looks like you're all in. Okay, so let's have some discussion, right? So we talked about, the development of the lake and recreation amenities and so on. What takeout do you have from the polling data there? What does that tell you? Or John or Leslie, what sort of questions do you have around that, in terms of us talking about the comprehensive plan and land use and so on?
I think several of the questions really spoke to the idea that Smithville Lake is a public amenity and a community amenity. And so I think that correlates with some of the comments that people chimed in with, and also provides more rationale on why people don't want to see things like homes or maybe just one large development that suddenly starts to privatize that area. I think that a lot of these things are kind of telling the similar story.
Yeah, I agree with Leslie on that. I think that if there's development next to the lake, it needs to be more public use, not private large, homes or developments, things like that. I think it should be something that, and partially because that area is so, coveted and hard to come by because of the Corps of Engineers. You don't get next to the lake really. So I think if we have the opportunity to do that, it needs to be very, public use type space.
Yeah, I actually find it kind of interesting that there's you asked the question on indoor recreation and the things that people mark that they didn't want at the lake. The things they don't want are the things that drive sales tax, and the only funding source we really have for anything is sales tax. The alternative to that is property tax. And not that this community doesn't have an appetite for raising their property tax on most things. So the one question I'd love to see on here is, would you be driving towards that point of where do we pay for this stuff if we're not going to support bringing in things that bring in tax dollars?
Yeah, when I was going to, so on that note, that's such a great point. I was going to pry a little deeper on hotels, on maybe a boutique hotel, because talk about something that has a couple of different beneficial tax streams, and the hotel tax specifically, which could be earmarked however the city would see fit. And that's something that in the polling got pretty widespread support. That was one of the more popular issues. But also, so I would maybe pose to folks, is that seen as kind of a public good, even if it's a private property in some kind of partnership with the city? Would that kind of check the box of being that kind of public serving element, even if it's a privately owned and operated hotel?
Well, John, one thing I want to, I know you work out of DC, and Missouri is a little bit of a different taxing jurisdiction. None of the lake currently is in city limits.
Right.
And also Missouri has a law that you can't tax hotels until you have a certain number within your city limits. So a boutique hotel would not put us there.
To clarify, Mayor, it's a certain number of beds.
Right. So a small 30-room boutique hotel would do nothing for us.
So how many beds do we need, Damien?
Is it 225, something like that, Cynthia?
It's over 200, 215, 225 seems about right to me. It's been a couple years since I've looked into that.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we'd have to annex that portion of the lake because to many people's disbelief, we own and have in city limits 0 inches of Smithville Lake. So they could put a 1,200 room hotel complex on the lake today, and we would benefit 0 from it.
Okay, good. All right, so let's roll on, right? So let's go to the next topic. Let's talk about tourism as an economic driver, and that's what we were starting to circle around there a little bit, right? And some of the comments obviously is what we've been talking about is that people, residents and visitors love a lot of what there is about the recreation, but there is some lack of the opportunity to be able to spend your money, right? That goes with the tourism experience, right? So, and one of the things we were probing yesterday was around potential growth and demand drivers from an economic development perspective, and so tourism is one of those, as is the downtown. And we did some rapid polling last night, and in terms of the question, just have to minimize this, but over the next 10 years, to what extent should the City of Smithville prioritise resources and attention to enhance tourism as an economic driver? You can see that was well supported by the people who did the polling. And in terms of the prioritisation should be given to prioritise a vibrant downtown Main Street as an economic driver. Again, it was very high, right? And obviously the connection between the lake and the downtown is a key part of that whole economic development strategy and trying to use tourism as an economic driver that delivers benefit to sort of commercial and retail in Smithville. But we were just talking about hotel beds, right? And of course, many communities have other embedded sources of accommodation. And Leslie, do you want to just talk to this a little bit in terms of the short-term rental market and Airbnbs and so on?
Yeah. So especially what came out too in the visioning work, as well as in the economic development pillar, is wanting that hotel or trying to see if that hotel makes sense for Smithville. A few things to keep in mind when we have those conversations. So especially working as economic developers, we run into this idea a lot of too, if you plan for something doesn't mean it actually happens. And a lot of times the hotel operators that would maybe come to Smithville or that you would maybe want to attract to Smithville, they typically like to go into markets where they feel has been really validated for visitor attraction and having customers to reduce their, development risk. And one of the ways that the hotel industry is seeing more and more of that demand driver for accommodations for hospitality is through things like short-term rentals, especially Airbnb, and that's really been pushing the hotel industry kind of nationwide, even as a trend. When we think about these big ideas, such as get a hotel on Smithville Lake or near Smithville Lake, we also are trying to push that a little bit further to say to ourselves, okay, if that's what our goal is, what are some other action steps that we can take to either get us to that goal or to provide an alternative pathway if there's difficult factors that come into play of attracting that development. Furthermore, so we have like a little bit of a slide today in the short-term rental market, and very few Airbnbs in Smithville. I think from our data, we were looking at less than 10 Airbnbs maybe were listed in Smithville, and I pulled a map today of, what are some options in Smithville in terms of Airbnb for Labor Day weekend to see what's available, and you can see on the map a few of those. key data points. Obviously, there's always controls and mechanisms at play for preventing Airbnb listings, and a lot of HOAs out Airbnbs or prohibit rentals for that market. So that might be driving some of the lack of the rentals in the area. But overall, I'd be curious too, as part of our discussion today, if there's any insights from the community's perspective on Airbnb or any conversations that have taken place kind of within this idea of tourism as an economic driver.
Okay.
John, anything else to add?
Yeah. That's good, Leslie. And we'll pick that. We've got some questions in the rapid polling, which we can probe, and then we can have some discussion about that. So thank you.
Perfect.
The other piece I wanted to add to this too was around sort of the changing role of food in the tourism story. So if you want to think of tourism as an economic driver, and you have a lot of sort of destination draw of people already coming to the lake, and now you've got this sort of connectivity building between the lake and the downtown and the rest is, I was thinking about culinary, right, which is and I sort of put this in because I know there's been some discussion, and I think I attended one of the workshops there on the Mo Eats, and culinary is really becoming a key part of the tourism mix in a lot of places. If you look at some of the data there, 63% of travellers take and share pictures of their food, and I'm not quite sure when we started doing that, right? But the culinary component and this search for authenticity, and it doesn't have to be really fancy, but what people are looking for is some really interesting and unique sort of dining, eating experiences, and places like Chops and so on in Main Street really fit that category of something that's kind of a little bit different and interesting. So I just thought I'd put that in there as potentially part of that sort of tourism driver and potential. So let's do a little bit of live polling here, right? So again, you might have to enter FIQ 124, but we're going to kick off with some questions around tourism. So, and looking at it from a point of view as an economic driver. So as a tourism destination, what types of visitors would you ideally like to see more of? So day trippers, overnight stays, weekend only visitors, or longer stay, convention type, sort of midweek type visitation. Yeah. And so the overnight stays, which is, increasingly high there. And I think, Leslie, to what you were talking about in terms of this, that thinking about Airbnbs as part of a strategy that, because, like hotels are lumpy, right? You have one that might have, 200 rooms, right? But then you either go none, and so on, right? So if overnight stays is a target area or weekends, then having ways to be able to accommodate people becomes part of what you have to consider.
Yeah, and when we think about economic impact of different types of tourism too, you have a more kind of robust and diverse type of economic impact when folks are staying for more than just the day. You're frequenting different types of businesses. There's more revenue that's coming, and there's kind of a difference between nighttime spending and daytime spending too. So having multiple night visitors is typically even more economically advantageous to a place.
Well, and actually day trippers, if you look at destinations that are on the edge of cities, so for example, some of the communities we work with on the Oregon coast out of Portland and around Seattle, which are day trips, right? Day trippers are really a kind of a nightmare, right? Because there's a lot of low occupancy cars. They clog up things and they leave very little economic benefit behind. In fact, many of them bring all their own stuff and just leave the rubbish behind, right? So, and I think that's part of where you could potentially get blindsided as a community with over visitation or over tourism at the lake. And it may not be over tourism like it's all developed out, but you may just have a lot of people coming there and they're going to not necessarily deliver economic impact unless you can think of ways to pivot that. All right, so let's go to the next one. There's been discussion about the potential of a mid-range hotel in Smithville. So this is not on the, not necessarily the kind of boutique one, but like just a mid-range sort of traveller business hotel. Where do you think such a hotel would be best located, right? So incorporated into the downtown area, somewhere near the lake, or the Hospital Bluff character area. So that's, sort of again is where the library and some of those commercial areas are.
And maybe ideally with exactly 226 rooms.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, we want way more than that so we can get taxed on it, right?
Yeah, true. Oh, so you don't get I see. So you only get taxed over that room limit.
Yeah, no, we still get that, but yeah, we need like, we need enough to have graduation in town and have people stay here, not go to Independence for graduation.
Great
or
point.
the big wedding venue that's coming in and they bring in a 200-person wedding,
Yeah. Okay. All right, good. So let's go to the next one. So many communities are seeing sharing economy accommodation filling gaps for hotels and vacation properties, Airbnb, etc. How do you feel about more of these in Smithville? Yes, great way to fill gaps in tourist accommodation. Mixed feelings. No, don't like them. Okay. Okay. So Leslie, that was what we were talking about, trying to understand the interest and support for that strategy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll go to the next one. And here you get to write as well, right? So one of the things in the community survey as part of the comp plan, a lot of people talked about wanting to have more events and festivals. And I know you actually have had a fair bit of those prior to the pandemic starting in the downtown. But what types of events and festivals do you think would work best for Smithville and deliver economic benefit? So you can type your response in. Okay, we've seen concerts, music, beer fest. Moonshine.
well, I mean,
All right. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go to the next one, which is the last one. People in Smithville have expressed interest and appetite, pun intended, for more unique local food and dining options. How important do you think culinary could be to visitors and tourists, right? So, it seems to be an emerging trend, but how important do you think this is here? So A, very important and create a great new niche for the community. B, has potential, but need to invest in making it work. And there is, the example of businesses have started and gone. Not really viable as visitors are more convenience food oriented. Now this is kind of interesting because part of what we're talking about here is local food, right? And part of what I think we're going to talk a little about this more tomorrow night, but is thinking about, which is what the Mo Eats was starting to try and probe into, is about local food systems and well. And is there opportunities to try and connect some of the the produce into this local food story as well? All right, good. Okay, so let's have some discussion, right? So, Leslie, do you want to pick up any of those items on that, or John?
Yeah, I'd actually like to revisit the short-term rental question with Airbnb. I think it was something like 18 or 20% of people didn't want to see the short-term rental market increase in Smithville, and my numbers might be a little bit off. I was wondering if anybody wanted to provide any sort of insight on some of the things that they don't want to see with that market, or some of their reasoning on why they think that that's not a good fit for the future of Smithville.
We have a friend, she doesn't live in Smithville, but right near the Smithville limits, and she has a beautiful property, and she has done Airbnbs, and people come in and just trash her place, which is really sad to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be a a reoccurring theme with short-term rentals too.
Yeah, that's particularly if you have that sort of party phenomenon, right? That's and I know cities. I've seen this in other like on coastal tourist areas where they're really having to work hard on local ordinances to try and I guess control the unintended impact of short-term rentals, and because it can change the character of a neighborhood fairly fast, and that's the fear for people, which is, you might have a row of houses, right, and then one of them turns over to be an Airbnb, and then before you know it, you've got a new neighbor every night, and sometimes that neighbor is 6 cars and 20 people, and so those type of things can be quite jarring to the sense of character or the sense of a community, and that's one of the things, Leslie, I often hear is the reaction, just as the lady was saying, is about some sort of unintended consequence or some undesirable impact.
Another, we've worked in towns, working with the city of Middlebury in Vermont, where they kind of have a flip side issue where there's such a high portion of homes are Airbnbs that it's really hindered the hotel market, and hotel operators aren't really able to operate very, very successfully, especially as Airbnbs are able to skirt a bunch of the taxes that, and again, not apples to apples in Smithville, but they found that to be kind of at odds with kind of the mainstream hospitality industry.
Yeah, good. And the other part, one of the things I wanted to probe too, and because I guess this conversation about tourism as a significant economic driver is, I think, in terms of the comprehensive planning process, and as part of economic development, this is a sort of I think there's a potential emerging really interesting opportunity here, and we had some discussions in I think at the launch about the idea of sort of recreation destination. This idea that you could have some of these, once you're connected to regional trails, that Smithville could be the destination, and that can start to then lead to recreation-based overnight stays, and people spending in the historic downtown and so on. How far do you think Smithville could really run with a tourism economy, a tourism-based economy?
I think we would have to increase our draw from what would they do once they got here if they're going to spend the night. Are there restaurants to go to? Is there a variety of restaurants to choose from? Are there places to wander around and shop? Are there, the things that coming here because there's a beautiful lake, if you're riding your bike, is great, but there's got to be other things to do once you get here. So I think that's a big piece of it. And that kind of goes back to the culinary conversation a little bit earlier too. We have in the past had a very highly rated, basically almost destination type restaurant where we did get a lot of draw. And pardon?
Chops and Kozaks, they're destination restaurants.
Well, they are. And so we need more of that, is my point. We had, when we had the Justice Drug Store, I know before we moved here, we had heard about that restaurant. And so we just need to keep kind of that upscale and at least have a selection there.
Well, Aroma Bistro is doing really well too. Are they in the city limits of Smithville?
They are, yeah, and they're doing great.
Yeah, they've been looking real busy, so that's good.
Soiree was great when it was up here.
And I think as a tourist, there needs to be a certain amount of obviousness when you get into a new community or you're going on a vacation, where you can be dropped, right next to your hotel or downtown, and everything's laid out in front of you because you don't know that area. Yeah, and so you should be able to look down the street and there's food and there's drink options and there's entertainment, and all of that is clear to you without having the knowledge of being a community member and knowing where those good places are. I think as Smithville residents, we know, my mom is from California. She came a few weeks ago from Santa Barbara, and I was able to drive her in the car, take her to La Doja Ridge Winery, and then go to Kozak's for dinner, and then hit the shaved ice cart, and the fresh Pop-Tarts from the coffee cart, because we know where those gems are in town, and we can drive our family around to those. But if you are coming here to visit and you go downtown, you're going to walk our square, our 2 square blocks of downtown and then say, what else is there?
Right.
And if we're going to go after a tourism market, we need to make that clear and obvious to any tourist coming in that does not know Smithville, that this is what we have available. And so in the planning, there needs to be a certain amount of looking to a specific location and being very purposeful about that. When you think about Weston, that's not that far away from us.
Right.
You can park in Weston and walk 6 or 7 blocks in either direction. And there's countless wineries and food options and store options. And that's something we don't have here. So if that's the direction we want to move, it is a bigger conversation about where are we focusing our efforts and what part of town are we looking at.
And it has to be open past 10 o'clock at night too.
Right.
Something to go along with that too, from me having moved here, I couldn't figure out how to access the lake. I mean, it took me a long time. Finally, it was like, okay, we're going to go fishing. We had to go into the bait shop and figure out, okay, how do we get to the lake to actually fish and be involved in that? So having that, how to access that part of it too as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like to me, oh no, go ahead.
Angela, with that idea too of not knowing how to access the lake, how did you end up figuring out how to access the lake? Like Google or driving around or looking for signs or?
We drove around the lake for a while and couldn't figure it out. Okay. And we decided we wanted to go fishing. So we stopped at the local bait shop and just asked him, where do we go? How do we get there to access this? It wasn't until we did one of these last year when we met that I learned that, oh, hey, if you pay a fee, now you can access the lake for a region. The concept of that was totally new. The other thing that I was going to ask, if we build a big hotel for this, how many people, when they come to access the lake, for example, and spend time at the lake, are they going to want to stay at a hotel or are they going to want to go camping? Are the people that are going to spend their time on the lake, are they really going to be at a big hotel or are they really going to be camping? And if you're building a big hotel, are we trying to build a big community or and I love the concept too of like, hey, that helps out with taxes and those types of things. But then there's also the concept of, hey, an Airbnb helps us keep the small town feel. So.
Yeah,
Angela, that was something I was going to mention earlier. Is I feel like we're almost talking about 2 different kinds of tourism, and one that I think that we have a lot of right now is like the camper, fisher, boater. There are loads of campgrounds around the lake that are part of the Clay County portion of tourism in that aspect. And like the mayor said, like we don't own a stitch of the area directly around the lake. And so it's really difficult for people who are like, they see that lake on the map and they're like, that's where I want to go. So then when they go find that information, like what they're finding is everything that's Clay County, which we're a part of. But I know that there's like some continuity issues, like between like city stuff and Clay County stuff. It's really difficult to do that. And then there's obviously the third entity with the Army Corps of Engineers of just like getting things done and getting that connectivity between all 3 of them. But I think the tourism that you're talking about, where it's more of like the nightlife, and obviously people who camp on the lake, they're going to want restaurants and that kind of thing. But if you drive your RV here and you didn't bring a car, it's much more difficult to like leave that campground that's out in the Clay County property and make your way into town. And it's the connection of those things in order to have that, like those people who want to enjoy like a winery or a brewery and like a nightlife and that kind of thing downtown. It's just, to me, it feels like a very 2 separate kinds of tourists. And we have a lot of the camper and we don't see them a lot in town because they pretty much bring everything they need with them where they find it on the lake. But I think it's just that finding that connecting piece where it's like, how do we tap into the people that are either already there, or how do we draw them into our town as something almost separate from the lake, but it's just an addition to what we already have here in town.
You know, one of the things I would kind of dovetail with that, Danny, is some of the most popular state parks have camping, they have a lodge, they have a restaurant. So I know we've organized a couple of large family activities and we love to camp, and some of the nieces and nephews love to camp out and tent camp. And then we have people who wouldn't be caught in a tent. So they want to be in the same place, but they would like to get a little cabin, or they would like to have a little lodge room. And I think, you know, if you had a complex like that that had a little bit of everything, it doesn't have to be huge, but it can offer all those kind of amenities where you can bring people in. And then if it's got connectivity to downtown and all that, I just think it kind of covers all the bases in some ways.
Yeah, Jim, I like that. I feel like if we were to be able to ever annex anything out at Smith's Fork, and I know with the dam being there, like that's going to be difficult. But if anything like that were to happen, I think almost like those like cabins, that kind of thing would almost be a better option, because we already have RV parking. We already have the primitive camping. And then there's lots of trails in that little one area that kind of spread out to other areas. And they're already connected into like the Clay County property right over into the lake. And that's really super convenient and awesome. But I feel like you're right. It's almost, you want the people who drive their car here and who drive their truck here and have that own mode of transportation. Because we don't, as far as I know, and I don't use it like often ever, Uber and that kind of thing, like I don't think it's something that's like readily usable here in Smithville, or at least it's not that prominent. I could be wrong on that, but people who actually have their own vehicle and can get from the campgrounds into our downtown, those are the people that you're going to be pulling in. Because if they didn't bring a mode of transportation, they're not making it into downtown. They're hanging out on their campsite or in their boat or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that too? I think, Danny, I think you did a really good job in sort of partitioning the tourism economy, right? And because I put the campers and those that you talked about, they're sort of really, for me, like they have about the economic impact of a day tripper, right? You know, they come, but like you say, they bring all their own stuff, right? And I think there's a sort of a logic we've got to get right here there's a group of people for whom the lake is the destination, right? And Smithville might be a spin-off economic spend, right? You might go to the restaurant, right? But I think the way we're framing up the you know, the Main Street work and the downtown community oasis and some of that, I think there's the potential for the Smithville downtown experience to be the destination and the lake's the spin-off, right? So you might go to the lake or you might use the trails during the day, but you're anchored in a different place, right? And I think there's really been no work done on the second version, right? That's why we asked the question about if there was a boutique hotel, where would you put it? Would you stick it on the, you know, Hospital Bluff character area, which is your typical kind of, you know, overnight you're driving through sort of hotel, or do you incorporate it into the downtown, which is then a different type of sort of tourism clientele or impact? And I think that and that's where the whole food sort of story fits in. So I think there's a way to think this through, that there may be a tourism destination potential here. And we've got that, we're going to talk about it more tomorrow night, but we're sort of trying to frame up thinking about the historic downtown precinct and how big that could be and how that connects to 169, how it connects to the lake and so on. But John, I know you do a fair bit of work on this sort of downtown. What's your comment on that? Do you want to weigh in on this idea of Smithville being a destination, you know, as tourism as an economic driver? There's not the lake being the draw necessarily, right? But it might be one of the sort of amenities.
Yeah, no, and what that makes me think too is kind of the identity of place, and that might be something, you know, where my mind goes is whether it's a marketing and branding campaign, whether it's kind of what is the kind of identity or experience that the city is looking to offer a visitor, and especially if the city's unable to build on or capitalize on kind of the physical space right along the lake, maybe that is really enhancing the downtown area and really having that really interesting, robust trail network where you're connecting right to the lake, but kind of building that in the consolidated area downtown, and then kind of celebrating to the visitor this downtown experience and then the easy access connection to the lake. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch, and maybe that's a possible way to kind of capitalize on best of both worlds and kind of strengthen both the experience and the types of impacts that visitors may have.
Yeah,
when we were raising our 8 children, if we went to like a national park or somewhere, we would be attracted to what Danny was saying, something that was in the nearby town. So I recall we stayed in Yellowstone, but the town that's right outside of the main entrance to Yellowstone, Like we went in and, West Yellowstone, my husband says, we went to a melodrama theater that night. So we went in and had a fun meal and then we went there. I think those kinds of things would get people that are at the lake into the town to spend money. I know when they've had the Renaissance Festival out there at the lake, I've seen a lot of the people dressed in their Renaissance costumes in Price Chopper shopping, and I'm thinking, oh, good, you're bringing your tax dollars to Smithville.
So you answered a very important question there, which is, because I was wondering how you have 21 grandchildren, and it's because you've got 8 kids, right?
Right, right. 1 marriage, 8 children.
All right. So any other comments on that? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Hey, David, if I may for a second, I know so I was talking kind of with Dan through chat here, All Who Wants Chops Barbecue, and at our campground, they do get a lot of orders from the campground. So I do feel that our campers do bring some kind of tourism and supporting local businesses. I know that they spend a lot of time in the downtown square, and kind of more from there. I'm not sure exactly how much, but I know they do, eat out a lot. So.
The other day we turned to coming home from work and we decided to go DD so we could go across the dam. I don't remember what night it was, but there was a most wonderful concert in the town square with Kansas City Symphony. And I was like, why didn't we know this was going on? We would have put chairs in our trunk and we would have stopped and just enjoyed it. So how do those kinds of things get out? I mean, we didn't even know it was happening.
That was Christian Family Day through Grace Church. So there was an event that they put on themselves. I don't know. I'm sure it was open to the public, but that was kind of an event that they ran out the courtyard for themselves and then promoted.
Sarah says it's Farmers Market that did the symphony.
The past 3 weeks.
The past 3 weeks.
Oh, so maybe more advertising on some way of getting, we didn't know anything about it. I was sad.
That's an ongoing problem, is getting the information to people where they will see it and they will listen to it or read it. We had to actively go down and talk to the camp hosts at Smith Forks and drop off menus to get the information to the campers on an ongoing basis. That's a big problem in this city or any city, is getting the information to the people where they will actually listen to it.
Yeah, that's a whole advertising campaign in itself. Being able to keep those camp hosts informed of what's going on, giving them flyers to hand out to each camper, those kind of things. Because I know when we've gone to different sites, we'll pull in and we'll get our camping information, and then we usually get, like, they'll give us a flyer of what's happening in the area, or if there's something, restaurants you can order from. We've had that a couple of times that we'll deliver to the campground. We've taken advantage of that because otherwise we wouldn't have known. So.
Exactly. Main Street programs trying to get that type of advertising together. It's extremely hard to tell because even mail these days, I open my mailbox. If it's an ad, I throw it in the trash and I get my stuff out and I pay attention to what I have to pay attention to. I'm inundated with all kinds of advertising. I don't look at emails. I delete stuff like that. So it's hard to tell what kind of advertising suits everybody now.
Now, I'm not a technology guru, but while we were sitting here, I looked up TripAdvisor, because when we go to a community, we look up TripAdvisor and see what are the best things to do. How do people get on there? Because there wasn't much for Smithville, Missouri. There was Ladoga Ridge Winery, there was Kozak's, there was the golf course, there was Smithville Lake. I'm trying to think, but I don't know much else what was on there. Just thinking offhand. How do you get a TripAdvisor site bigger for Smithville?
Well, and that kind of assistance to businesses to help make sure that they can improve their school, make sure that they're on TripAdvisor, make sure that they have a good post, make sure that they're encouraging their visitors, is the type of technical assistance right in the wheelhouse of a Main Street program too. So that's something that, especially if there's any representatives on this call, that's for anybody for the Main Street program. That is, you see so many main streets that's a focus of making sure that their businesses have strong social media presence and strong profiles on all the different TripAdvisor, Yelp, Google Maps, etc.
Yeah, it's the digital presence. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also it's a learning curve for the businesses themselves, that they need to be saying to their customers, hey, be sure and rate us on TripAdvisor, or rate us on, because I know I've had people come to do different things here, at home, landscaping or whatever, and I've had 2 or 3 say, hey, do me a favor if you wouldn't mind rating us on X, and I'll pretty much do it if they've done a good job, but I sure wouldn't have done it or thought to do it if they hadn't said something.
All right, good. So let's, it's just a couple of things to finish up here, right? So, so just talking for a moment about moving forward and next steps, just so you know what's coming. We have our next task force meeting coming. They're going to be in the last, so 31st of August, that week. So very end of August, first week of September. And what we're gonna task you with, right, and the community with between now and then. So we've got a series of these conversations occurring this week, and then we're going to be running a series of discussion topics on the portal, right? So we want to, I think the polling results tonight, there's some really interesting information there. We want to expand that and validate that with the community. There's a couple of kind of areas of questions here where I think we can dig a little bit deeper on. So we really want to be running a sort of a month-long deeper dive into community engagement and questions around some of these topics we've been talking about. So our next task force meeting, when that's scheduled, what we'll be looking to do with you is to really bring a really sharp focus to the sort of ideas and the sort of recommendations that are coming out of these different areas. That goes into the draft and revised comprehensive plan. We're looking to get that done in September, and then obviously that goes into the approval process. And then your opportunity to stay track on it is to follow it on the portal. The link's there, but I'm sure you've been sent it before. But we just really appreciate your time tonight, right? So these task forces are just such an important part of us being able to explore some of these topics, right? Because at the end of the day, this whole thing has to, pass the straight face test. It has to go out to the community, and they've got to be able to look at it and say, yep, that looks good, or we're with that. We don't really want to have any surprises right at the end, or have people sort of resist something, or there's sort of a pushback. So we want to find this place where we can be sort of bold and ambitious in the comprehensive plan, and really lay out like a roadmap to 2030, but knowing that we've been able to ground truth it and validate it so that we're on the money. It's right at that point, which is maybe slightly uncomfortable because it's a little bit ambitious, but we know we've got to go there a little bit. That's sort of where we want to get that, because I think that's what the community's wanting in terms of the vision. So, so your input and contribution is just invaluable in terms of that process. So I'd like to thank you for your time. So anything from John or Leslie before we finish up, or any final questions?
No, I thought this was a great discussion. I learned a lot as well.
It was a really great conversation, going from starting with this idea of connectivity from a very tangible, physical way to ending with how do we connect with potential visitors and how do we connect with people to get into our businesses. So I really enjoyed the story arc, intentional or unintentional. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and that's great, Leslie. And then, of course, tomorrow night, we've got the task force, which is looking at the small town feel and the community oasis, which is all sort of part of that narrative as well, right? So, and we'll be sort of digging in a lot more in things on, discussions around, what that downtown community oasis could feel like, where the gateway entry points to the community should be, what should be the experience of arriving, when do you know you've arrived in Smithville, and what does that feel like? So we'll be digging into a lot of those sort of topics as well. So Heather, anything from you or Cynthia, just to finish up?
I do. I just want to thank everyone for your participation tonight. I know sometimes it's difficult in a Zoom environment, but this has been really productive for city staff to hear, and appreciate the facilitation of the team in this, but the participation of those of you who are from Smithville. And as David said, tomorrow night also, this week has really built on itself. We talked housing, we talked economic development, we're talking recreation, and tomorrow I feel like really kind of pulls it all together. And I would encourage those of you who have some time tomorrow night or tomorrow afternoon into evening to participate as well, because I love the way this is all kind of coming together.
Okay.
Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it.
All right, everybody. So we'll call it a wrap, okay? This is a Zoom wrap. Okay,
Awesome.
so thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
And as I said, we'll be posting the video from this, the recording from this will be posted on the portal. The rapid polling results will get posted as well, and the slide deck as well. So if you want to review any of that material, that'll be up the next day or two. There'll be a tab there which will be for each of the task forces. And you know, obviously it's just fantastic information for the community to be able to dig into and understand what the thinking is. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.